Right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Great to see so much interest in this event on nature positive livelihoods. We'll just give a few seconds for everyone to get involved. It gives me a chance to have a sip of coffee. Hope you can do the same if it's the morning where you are, and if it's the evening where you are, like it is for two of our presenters, Robert and Richard, pour yourself something stronger. Right, we've got busy, uh, a busy, packed 1 hour today with several different people speaking. So I'm going to make a start, and if anyone comes late, well, I guess they'll have to catch up with conversations with their colleagues and through watching the recording late. So thanks everyone for joining us. Welcome to this webinar on nature positive livelihoods. I'm Tom Broadhurst, Program Manager for Climate Resilient by Nature at WWF Australia. This is an Australian government-funded initiative that's implemented by WWF and a range of partners to promote nature-based solutions to climate change in Asia Pacific. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we're all on today. And I'm on Dja Dja Wurrung country in what's now Castlemaine in Victoria, Australia, and I pay my respects to leaders past, present, and emerging. It'd be great if you haven't already done so. If you can post in the chat where you're calling from, introduce yourself to your colleagues, and I'll keep talking in the background while you all read who's here. But it's great to see so many people from so many different places on the call today. So the Dja Dja Wurrung people, on whose lands I'm located, for thousands of years have understood the interconnection and the interdependence between people and nature, and how when nature thrives, people do too. Now, unfortunately, all too often these days, that connection to nature is being weakened in modern society, yet the dependence of people on nature remains, whether we're aware of it or not. And nature provides humanity with visible goods like food and fiber and materials, but also less visible ecosystem services such as nutrient cycling, pollination, water purification, disaster prevention, that our economies and societies depend upon. And what's more, nature does this for free, which might explain why we sometimes take it for granted. So indeed, nature and the life support systems it provides us all are under huge threat. We've lost 70% of wildlife populations in the last 50 years, which to me is an amazing stat. And critical habitats that regulate our weather, our water, our nutrients, soil, and the oceans are under threat. For example, the Amazon rainforest, as we've seen in the news, is drying out. Coral reefs are on the brink. Yet at the same time, 700 million people worldwide still live in extreme poverty. Inequalities increasing, conflicts rising, and there are still too many people, especially women and girls, who lack access to water, to healthcare, to education, to food, and who struggle to meet their basic needs and fulfill their potential. Now, these, don't want to depress everyone, these huge global challenges of sustainable development and the depletion of nature are accelerated and exacerbated by climate breakdown. And this obviously can feel a bit overwhelming, particularly for those of us that work in the sector. Yet at WWF, we believe that nature is our ally, and that restoring biodiversity and ecological processes is part of the solution to tackling these interrelated challenges, both locally and globally. And we've signed up to the Nature Positive Initiative, which aims to halt and reverse the depletion of nature by 2030 and work towards regeneration by 2050. This means a net gain in the health, abundance, diversity, and integrity of species and ecosystems. It's a big challenge delivering that goal along with the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. And we think that it requires a joined up approach with people and livelihoods at the centre. That's because more than a third of humanity directly depends on nature for their livelihoods, including through fishing, through farming, through forestry, and with critical ecosystems under threat, some traditional and rural livelihoods are under pressure. Now, this is especially true in the coastal communities across the Indo-Pacific region, where the disproportionate impacts of climate change are being felt. So So how do we balance the restoration of nature and sustainable development? A big key question. Well, we think that nature-based solutions offer one pathway, and NBS, as they're known, which involves intentionally protecting, restoring, managing ecosystems such as forests or mangroves or coral reefs, in order to tackle social challenges like climate change, can deliver benefits for people and nature and climate. And I'll talk about climate resilient by nature now. So if you could change slides, please, please, Robert. There we go. Got a lovely map there. So Climate Resilient by Nature, which is the program I manage, has been working with partners for 4 years now to increase the number of communities in Asia Pacific that participate in and benefit from nature-based solutions. And so far, the program's directly involved 13,000 people in 160 communities across about 10 countries. And we've got 8 active projects, which are shown on the map here. And this is a very whistle-stop tour of these projects, 2 of which we'll hear from today. We've got community-led carbon projects in Vanuatu and Fiji with Live and Learn and Nakau. We've got coral reef restoration projects throughout the Pacific with the Kyeema Foundation and Corals for Conservation. We've got agroforestry projects in Timor-Leste with Caritas and CRS. We've got women-led agroecology projects in Vanuatu with ActionAid, farmer-managed natural regeneration projects with World Vision in the Sols, and we've got some that are managed by WWF directly as well. We've got some nature-positive businesses in the Pacific working with sea grapes in Solomon Islands and sea cucumbers in Fiji, and some for flood-based, nature-based livelihoods in the Mekong River Basin with WWF Laos and Vietnam. If you could change slides, please, Robert. So whilst these projects use a variety of different approaches, in all of them, livelihoods are central. Whether to enhance incomes or increase food security, diversify opportunities, or build communities' resilience to shocks and stresses. And in most cases, these livelihoods can be considered as sustainable or resilient in the sense that they do no harm and can be continued. But can they all be considered as nature positive, which means leading to a net gain in nature? Now, this is not has not proven to be as straightforward as it appears. So some of the projects support livestock or agricultural practices that, if you look at them in isolation, don't appear to be particularly sort of eco-friendly or might even generate their own environmental challenges. How do these actions contribute towards a nature positive agenda? So as part of the CR by N Knowledge Hub, which you can find on our website, we commissioned some research to explore this very issue. And Woodhill Solutions were deployed to propose some essential characteristics and a framework for interpreting nature-based livelihoods, to explore how to manage trade-offs between nature, climate, and livelihoods, and and ultimately to encourage us all to adopt nature-positive livelihood strategies. And again, today we'll hear from Robert and Richard from Woodhill Solutions to present their initial findings from this exercise, introduce us to that framework. And then we're also going to hear from Rhett from Nakau Live and Learn in Vanuatu, and Marika from Kyeema Foundation, which works in the Pacific, to talk about the livelihoods approaches in their CRBN projects and how they fit with this framework. So this is relatively new. So we aim to inspire some discussion and reflection, and afterwards we'll have some Q&A at the end. So feel free as you go along to post your questions in the chat, and my colleague Veronica will monitor them and collate the best ones so we can discuss them. And we're also keen to get your feedback and learn how this might support your own work at the intersection of development, conservation, and climate. And I think if Veronica might well have a poll here, where you can let us know where your interest lies or where you work. And whilst we're doing that, let's hand over to Robert and Richard, who will introduce themselves and get us started. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, for the introduction. So yes, my name's Robert Arthur. I'll be presenting along with my colleague Richard Friend, and we'll also be involving some of our colleagues from the Pacific who will be presenting. So this is results from some research that we were doing about nature-positive livelihoods in nature-based solutions, focusing on what we could learn from the projects in the Pacific. So firstly, the key messages from what we learned. Well, firstly, that nature-based solutions are really based on the roles that nature can play in addressing societal challenges. And what that means is that nature-based solutions that do not consider livelihoods are not really nature-based solutions. So livelihoods represent an important starting point for working out what kinds of nature-based solutions might be relevant within target landscapes. Secondly, when we're thinking about livelihoods, it's important to think in terms of the strategies that people, households, and communities employ, not just individual activities. And livelihood strategies can include a range of different activities and combinations with a greater or lesser roles for nature, as Thomas mentioned. And so it's when we start with livelihood strategies that we can start to begin to find more locally appropriate nature-based solutions that can support nature-positive livelihoods and deliver for both people and nature. So in order to sort of take that as a starting point, we'll look a bit more closely at what we mean by livelihoods and livelihood strategies. In doing so, we're framing this in terms of sustainable livelihoods. So when we think about sustainable livelihoods, we understand that people, both individually and collectively, are responding to their local context as they perceive and understand it, and they try to achieve their livelihood outcomes. And these may include food security, nutrition, health, culture and solidarity, as well as income. And in order to meet these kind of needs and aspirations, they employ different livelihood strategies. And these strategies can involve activities such as farming, wild harvesting, or marketing of natural products. But households and communities may specialize in particular activities, or they may diversify across activities. Often we find that strategies will include activities that change over the course of the year. And they may also include both urban and rural activities, or important roles for nature as a safety net. And not all activities are income generating. And the sets of activities that households and communities engage in will depend upon combinations of assets available. And these assets include nature, human assets such as education and physical ability. They may include different social networks, material assets that people have, and finance and access to credit. And in addition to these assets, we find that also institutions and social norms can play important roles in influencing who is able to use these assets and how. Aspects such as gender, markets, access to natural resources all also influence livelihood strategies. So when we're thinking about livelihood strategy rather than individual activities, then the potential role of nature within these strategies becomes more important. And if we're interested in what nature-based solutions might offer or how to meet nature-positive goals, then understanding livelihood strategies becomes an important aspect. So if we then look a little bit more about this sort of idea of nature positive, when it comes to nature and environmental restoration, we're probably all familiar with this graph representing a vision of nature positive future and the importance of bending the curve of environmental degradation. And this provides a basis for understanding how human activities affect nature across a continuum. And this continuum extends from, on the one end, sort of degrading nature, perhaps through overexploitation of natural resources, through creating opportunities for preventing degradation, for example, by removing barriers in watercourses. Furthermore, moving along a bit further, about enabling recovery and nature that thrives by perhaps protecting and restoring biodiversity and critical ecosystem functions. And we can think along similar lines with livelihood strategies and livelihood outcomes and their ability to meet human needs and aspirations. When we do this, we can see a sort of scale of different livelihoods and well-being. And our livelihood scale goes from impoverishing, which is about increasing or intensifying the negative economic, material, social, or human outcomes that are associated with poverty and vulnerability. And this may include increasing debt, poor health, or increasing social isolation. Those are all forms of impoverishment. Reducing poverty is perhaps another important effect, and this is relief from some of the negative impacts on economic, material, social, human aspects for people that are experiencing poverty. So this might be reducing indebtedness, preventing exploitative relationships. Moving further along, we have preventative interventions that are about stopping people from becoming impoverished or from experiencing poverty and vulnerability. And these are sort of measures that include preventing indebtedness or perhaps providing access to safe water. Improving the situation is more about starting to meet aspirations of strengthening people's individual and collective capabilities and their freedoms to create the livelihood outcomes that they desire and aspire to, about creating opportunities for people to influence development priorities for their communities. And finally, we have the thriving people, where people have capabilities and freedom to flourish, meeting their own livelihood outcomes sustainably into the future through strong relationships and control over their lives, resources and health. And putting these two together, we can start to understand a bit more about what nature positive livelihood look like. So we combine these two scales to provide a matrix that can be used to understand the context and identify where there's successful coexistence. So on this matrix, we can kind of start to map different situations. For example, we might have a restored mangrove that is able to provide food and medicinal plants. Or we may find a situation where both people and nature are impoverished and degraded. For example, through fish trade that incentivizes overfishing and fish stocks and habitats become degraded. The matrix also highlights potential trade-offs that can exist. And these include, for example, between restoring nature at the expense of people's livelihood strategies. For example, when a protected area excludes people, preventing them from being able to meet their own needs. And perhaps providing only savings and loan schemes that result in indebtedness. Or perhaps it's about a situation where livelihoods, in the short term at least, are able to improve at the expense of nature. For example, through agriculture intensification or aquaculture development that generates income that can degrade terrestrial or aquatic environments, including soil or water quality. We can also use this matrix to think a bit about climate resilience. And in this case, the goal is about thinking about the solutions and livelihood strategies that have resilience in the face of climate change. This suggests that there are different degrees of climate resilience, and we can map these onto the same matrix. So, for example, we may find that there are forms of climate resilience where we're failing, that the effect is that the environments are becoming degraded and people impoverished by the way that people are responding or able to respond to change. Other forms are about coping, where people are able to meet their needs, but not their aspirations. Adaptive transformations are about, adaptive change is about being able to adapt more positively in the face of climate change. And finally, we have transformative change, where people are able to thrive and to enable nature to thrive as well. And so this gives us a sort of degree or levels of climate, degrees of climate resilience that we can see people exhibit in the face of climate change. And this matrix allowed us to sort of think through and explore the experience from the Climate Resilience by Nature project to try and identify important lessons from the programme. And we can hear a bit about these now from Richard, and then a couple of examples for projects in the Pacific. So Richard, over to you for the key lessons.
Okay, thank you very much. And as you've heard, if we are to put sustainable livelihoods center stage in our nature-based solutions in the attempt to deliver positive outcomes for people and for nature, we've identified 5 sets of lessons that are important for programs throughout the project cycle, from strategizing, from design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation and learning. And the first of these, as you've heard from the presentation on the matrix and the connections between environmental and livelihood outcomes, and this sense of a scale of positive change, is being able to understand the historical context in which we find ourselves. So these patterns of environmental degradation and poverty and vulnerability often have deep historical roots that have affected people's ability to access resources and to turn resources into livelihood benefits. And we see in many cases that we're intervening in situations where people are already responding or trying to manage a situation that has a long history of change. That history may go back through to processes of colonialism and the ways in which resources have been claimed and extracted and benefits taken elsewhere and people dispossessed from their traditional lands and their resources, but also the ways in which livelihood strategies, livelihoods patterns have altered with market encroachment, with globalization, and the changes in the kinds of livelihood activities, economic activities that people are engaged in, and equally the opportunities that people might have. So it's important to understand that when we're engaging in a particular context, there is a broader pattern, broader historical pattern that has shaped what we see and how we're intervening. And it's also therefore important to think about this history in considering how we might be able to affect change going into the future. And I think one of the key lessons that we've drawn from the CR/N project program really is that these historical contexts and understanding these contexts vary very dramatically, and the potential to influence change, the potential to move along that continuum, the livelihoods and the environmental continuum, differs quite significantly in very different contexts. Could we have the next one, please? And nature-based solutions, as you heard at the beginning, really are anchored around this ambition to address societal problems, societal challenges. And these are grand societal challenges like climate vulnerability, disaster risk reduction, but also issues around poverty and vulnerability. But as we think about societal challenges, it's also really fundamentally important to understand how these are manifest and experienced by different people in different ways, in different places and at different times. And the ways in which people are impacted by these kinds of challenges, by these histories and patterns of degradation or pressure on resources and pressures on livelihoods are experienced very significantly according to lines of gender, disability, wealth, ethnicity. And in determining how we intervene in supporting nature-positive livelihoods, it's therefore really important to understand different people's asset profile, their capabilities, their abilities to turn their assets into livelihood outcomes, benefits that they aspire to achieve, and how these are shaped by different social and economic forces, and how they differ for households, communities, and individuals. One of the key issues in thinking about this disaggregation of societal challenges, therefore, allows us to target people who may be experiencing poverty more acutely than others, to fulfill our commitments to GEDSI, and also to ensure that the benefits of whatever we promote and whatever we implement are distributed or equitably and fairly, and that we avoid the patterns of elite capture where the benefits of nature-based solutions can benefit only a small, powerful group within a community, within a broader society. So really thinking about the sort of the dynamics and the interactions between different people and how people experience circumstances differently and how they may benefit differently. We move on to the next one, please. And cutting across nature-based solutions and the ambition to achieve nature-positive livelihoods is a recognition that there is inevitably there's a need for some degree of trade-offs, of balancing and reconciling competing or differing agendas and interests. And in order to do so in an equitable sense, we have to really apply some core principles associated with rights, with human rights and justice. And these should shape how we begin engaging in nature-based solutions from that very early stage of strategizing all the way through the implementation phase of nature-based solutions. And there are core principles of human rights and justice that we can draw on. There are rights positions around the process of doing projects, of implementing. So issues around recognition and procedural rights, so to ensure that there is a fair and equitable representation of different groups and different interests throughout the process, but also in terms of distributive rights, as I talked about earlier, that the benefits of nature-based solutions do accrue to those people who need them the most. And that there is a restorative dimension as well, that people have the rights to address injustices and the ability to claim those rights, and for those infringements of rights to be addressed fairly. And I think there's also another key element when we're talking about nature-based solutions, particularly at that landscape scale, is that as benefits and costs may be distributed somewhat unevenly, it's important that the rights of those who are most at risk from the potentially negative consequences are prioritized in the way in which trade-offs are negotiated and discussed. Can we move to the next point? And it's also important to think about how we can ensure that as people's livelihood strategies may change and may adapt to changing circumstances, whether those are the ways in which programs and ways nature is managed, or in the ways in which people are responding to climate change, that the kinds of support and intervention around livelihood strategies do not intensify patterns of risk. So, for example, we see in many cases how interventions to support nature-positive livelihoods intervene at the point of markets and institutions and trying to diversify people's livelihoods so that they can benefit from emerging markets. But we also have to ensure that while people diversify livelihood strategies, that they are not engaging in activities that may be precarious and potentially might fail, perhaps due to a failure in a market in which they become engaged, and to ensure that any shock or crisis or a failure in a livelihood strategy doesn't have catastrophic or far-reaching consequences for people's livelihoods. So it's important to remember that diversifying livelihoods also has to ensure that the different livelihoods activities within strategies have a degree of redundancy, that if one fails, there's enough in people's portfolio that they can recover and recover well. And also to ensure that there is a degree of safe failure, to ensure, again, that the livelihood strategies are resilient to stresses, shocks, and crises. And finally, the other key lesson is that if we're to put nature positive livelihoods and livelihood strategies center stage, it's really important that we allocate sufficient resources to deliver the change that we aspire to. And this goes back to understanding the historical context as well, that the historical and the context of change that has influenced patterns of degradation, of poverty and vulnerability may take a great deal of time to improve. And it's important that we have the commitments from the beginning for an appropriate and adequate time frame, allocation of financial resources, and other kinds of inputs to deliver that kind of positive change. So these are the 5 key lessons that we've distilled from the CR/N project that will help, we hope will help in the ways in which we design nature-based solutions to deliver these nature-positive outcomes, nature-positive livelihood outcomes. Thanks, Rob.
Okay, thank you very much.
There we go. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Richard. I think that's the end of your like a formal presentation bit, but you're here to answer some questions later in the session today, because we'll keep moving in the interest of time. But yeah, so thanks a lot. If you have got questions or comments, please either post them in the chat and we'll pick them up later, or save them till the Q&A session at the end. But that part was the theory, if you like. So now for the practice. So we'll hear from a couple of Climate Resilient by Nature program partners to tell us about how livelihoods fit in their nature-based solutions projects. So first up, it's the Kyeema Foundation and Marika Fransen, who's the CEO of Kyeema Foundation. So the organisation's best known for its livelihoods projects that work with village chickens, and has partnered with Corals for Conservation for this particular project to bring the best of nature-based solutions and livelihoods together. At least that's the theory. So over to you, Marika, to tell us all about it. If you could change slides, Robert, that'd be great.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to share, because yes, all of this theory we've put in practice with this project. So I'm really delighted to be sharing what we have learned on nature positive livelihoods with the project that we have been doing. So what have we been doing? In this project, the communities that we work with across the Pacific in Papua New Guinea, Samoa and Fiji, they mostly relied on fishing for their livelihoods for the last couple of generations. But we learned that fishing was no longer producing the yields that they used to get due to the destruction and the bleaching of the coral reefs close to shore. So they would have to go out further to catch the fish, which is obviously more dangerous, more time consuming, and also more expensive being in there. And then the lower catch rates meant the families were eating less, and they were selling more of their fish. So that resulted in malnutrition. And for instance, in PNG, there's a shocking statistic of 49.5% of kids having childhood stunting. So what we did is a lot of community consultation and community awareness training on environmental issues, the impact of that and how it might be addressed. Our wonderful partner, Corals for Conservation, trained community members in coral gardening, using heat-tolerant corals and a mangrove root planting. And then we came in with the humble village chicken, as Tom was saying, as an alternative livelihood to replace the role of fish for protein and also income, more importantly, being in there. So the aim of the project was to address the people's pressing livelihood needs while restoring the degraded environments. And the communities rely on their environment for their livelihoods. But nature, clearly, as mentioned earlier today, nature needs time to restore so it can support the communities for generations to come. But it's a really hard ask from a community to say, well, can you not fish for a bit while you're restoring that livelihood? But we promise you in 18 to 24 months, everything will look better if you don't. And I think it's a bit like asking us to say, well, please don't drive and use the plane for 18 to 24 months to kind of avoid some of the, or reverse some of the climate change impacts. And you will only see the impact of that at the end of the period. Like, that would be a really hard ask from us to do without knowing what that looks like at the end of that 24 months. So giving people an alternative livelihoods and teaching them how to look after and breed village chickens for eggs and meat, both for consumption and selling, allowed them to give the reef a break, as one of our participants so beautifully said, and for them to have an alternative livelihood where they have food on the table but also can make an impact, allowed them to say, okay, well, let's see what this does. And then the coral gardening activities are also led by community members. And as part of the project, they would go out in the water like once a month. So they would also be able to report back to community members on the changes that they were seeing in the reef. They saw the fish coming back and all these kind of things. Not everyone can swim in these communities, so it wouldn't be very visible, but for the fact that the community members were the ones going into the water, seeing the effects and report back on it, gave the community really that confidence of like, all right, this is a good thing to do. And this is where I would like to go to the photo here in this slide. So the beautiful framework that has just been presented. This one is actually a photo of the end of learning event we recently had in Fiji. And over there you see a K. And that was put up there by one of our community members who is a coral gardener, has a little mangrove nursery and also a chicken farm. And if you can press the little, yeah, perfect, that would be great. So she's been working on this for about 2 years. And when you look at it, you might think like, oh, well, she's not quite there yet. But if you think about where she came from, the reefs were really empty in her community. There was no alternative livelihoods. Then the journey that she's been on, coming out of that failing area, has been quite amazing and incredible to see. So I think for us, it shows it's working. I would love to put this forward to all our communities and see where people are at being in it. So that's good. I'll wrap up soon being in it. So how do these interventions contribute to the protecting, the restoring the nature? the living situation in these communities is really dire. For them, the livelihoods come before nature. So having that alternative livelihood is incredibly important, because having that alternative livelihood means that they can give nature the time that it needs. So we enable awareness, education, and also engagement around the importance of looking after the environment. And we see that our communities are really starting to see that importance and are now very happy to continue that effort, because they can see that it's paying off. And last thing I want to add to it, the interesting thing has been that people like no-take fish zones are a really big part of this project. And we see that when communities feel confident in village chickens and that that's enough of an alternative livelihood, then they can start thinking about no-take fish zones and make that commitment there. So there's a really critical relationship there. I'll leave it at that. I've got lots more to say, but thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Marika. That was an excellent and rapid summary. It's hard to fit all the great work that you do into only 5 minutes, but you rose to the challenge. So thanks a lot for that. Sorry, I'll turn my camera on as well. Right. So next up, we've got Rhett from Nakau Live and Learn in Vanuatu. So Rhett works at the intersection of people, forests, and climate action in Vanuatu. And she's got 8 years of experience in biodiversity conservation, climate change, community engagement, women and youth empowerment. The list goes on, and she supports customary landowners to design and lead their own forest carbon projects. So over to you, Rhett, to tell us about the livelihoods in your CRYN project. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. Next slide, please. So at Nakau and Live and Learn, we support the forest carbon project across Vanuatu, Fiji, and Solomon Islands. Oftentimes, the challenge that we known before is the forest carbon is scrutinized as is not directly benefit local community, and benefit is often controlled by outsider rather than the community themselves. So at Nakau and Live and Learn develop our forest carbon project is verified under the Plant Vivos Foundation, and we build on the customary land ownership and respect their strong governance and allow them to directly manage their benefit. And we also develop the project build on the process of trust with community in a year-long preparation, and build on the pre-prior informed consent principle, where every stake of the project trigger community benefit, allows the community to decide and make decision where their right is not lost on their lands. And also the project that we build is built on the 30-year agreement, which will enable for the permanent forest protection, and also allow the intergenerational benefit across, like in the community themselves, and also for like benefit the lasting livelihoods. So, yep, next slide, please. One of the examples for Vanuatu's projects, also across Fiji and Solomon Islands, every project is truly a community-led ownership, and we build on by their community register legally recognized, and then they will receive all carbon revenue, manage all the benefit, and they have their own benefit sharings plan for their communities. And here is one of the examples from Vanuatu. How they manage their carbon income is they paid for their school and education fee for their children, and providing water tanks, fighting water scarcity, and also using the fund to open the small business in the communities, and paid ranger roles in their community themselves to do the forest patrols, forest carbon monitorings annually, and also their restoration works, and also paid for their community to manage their own projects. And it's not just the Forest Carbon project is not just only benefit the society, social aspect, but also benefit the natures. Like as I mentioned before, the 30-year agreements is a permanent forest protection in 30 years, and allow them to manage the one of the like invasive species in their communities. And we have seen through our assessment these endemic species of Vanuatu in Fiji as well, and globally certain species continue to present in their community, and they also be able to diversify one of the other income by having the ecotourism visit their site, seeing bird and other nature in their project, and also at the same time fighting climate change through carbon sequestration. I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhett. That was excellent. Yeah, and again, it's really good to see how your project's delivering benefits for nature and for people as well. And obviously, working with nature involves a long time scale. So it's really great that you emphasize the 30-year sort of agreements and how you work in partnership with the community. So that's awesome. Thank you. Now we'll have the opportunity to ask Marika and Rhett and Robert and Richard some questions. But I wondered if I could just hand back to Robert, perhaps, just to draw some threads and reflect on what we've heard, and then we'll go into Q&A. So post your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I think they're great, and I think what really comes across is this idea of how livelihoods and nature can relate to this matrix, and that we can see that there are these different strategies that have been pursued and different interventions that nature-based solutions have enabled, and that may be the example of the more short-term coping strategies that are required to support livelihoods at the same time as giving people a chance to restore nature, or it can be more sort of collective action to support communities to meet their collective needs and aspirations, but also protect nature in the process. And I think that these examples really demonstrate how nature-based solutions can fit onto this matrix, but also the examples of the different lessons that were learned, of the historical context and the different ways in which people's livelihoods can be supported through nature-based solutions. Richard, I don't know if you want to add a bit more as well.
Sure. I mean, I think, yes, and thanks to Rhett and Marika for wonderful presentations. And I think they capture very nicely two very different contexts, if you like, where Kyeema Foundation is really addressing the sort of foundational livelihood needs of people who are experiencing the outcomes of long histories of pressure and degradation and dispossession, if you like. And I think Nakau speaks very well to the ability of people to forge their own destinies and take control and the ownership in a very legal sense over a meaningful 30-year time frame that allows them to then make the kinds of investments in the livelihood outcomes, where it's education, it's the sort of the water tanks, the investment in small businesses, that then have a sort of a multiplier effect in community development. So I think these are very excellent examples of strategies that are designed for different contexts and addressing different kinds of priorities and needs.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Robert. And thanks to our presenters. We've got a few a few questions in the chat. Some are quite specific, but there's a couple that are aimed at Rhett. So get ready, Rhett. I think people want to know how you started your project in the beginning. Question from Yifan. How did you finance the early years of the project, doing that intensive community engagement before the credit revenue could be generated? And how did the communities make the decisions on what to do with the resources that they get from the carbon markets? So over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So, how we finance for the early year preparation is through funded from the development sector, like CBOR buy-ins. So, for Vanuatu example, the forest carbon project that we developed is verified under Plan Vivo using one of the methodology is avoided deforestation since 2014. And through CO buy-in projects since the beginning of the start of the project, we were able to extend this project by one of the other methodology is through restoration and climate management. So through that fund, that's why we were able to prepare the projects using other methodology, and we are hoping that by next year we'll be able to certify that credit through removal like invasive species and also restoration through that carbon certification. I hope that answered that question. And for the community, how they determine their benefit is through we have a lot of community consultation with them. So on there, as I maybe if you can go back to the slide, my slide in the previous, you can see the diagram. We have the flow chart, how we spend generation like income. So their project owner community, they have their own benefit sharing plan. So that benefit sharing plan is through consultations that within their community. So among their community, they decide when they get the income, like revenue, how they want that income to spend on. So they through that their governance and that agree upon on how they decide that revenue to spend. And yeah, we also provide a lot of capacity building on the community. Like for example, business manager, we train how to manage their finance. We train community how to patrol, how to use Avenza map, how to identify species. So through that monitoring, so we have 3 monitoring: carbon monitoring, social monitoring, and biodiversity monitoring for their carbon project. So we train them, and also we also train them how to manage their project as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Rhett. Yes, a lot of interest in the carbon projects and the carbon markets and how to get them started. I'm just wondering, I'll throw in a question of my own and perhaps give this to Marika to answer first. But how in your projects do you take climate risk or resilience into account in your livelihoods initiatives? How do you kind of plan for the future, make sure that the livelihoods are able to cope with a changing climate?
Thanks, Tom. I think, as mentioned earlier, diversification is very important, but I think for us as well, like the starting point is always the community. So what is it that they want to do? Where do they see value? What is a good livelihood for them? Understanding what's available in those communities and what they can do. I know we focused heavily on the chickens in this presentation, but we're also, like in Fiji, we're helping communities set up a copra little business, jewelry making. So in every community, it's kind of business, and we obviously have the chickens, but it's also what else are we doing to diversify the opportunities and reduce kind of the risk for people, so that if one thing doesn't work, how can we go to another? Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Marika. I guess that relates to sort of Stephanie's question about understanding that the alternative livelihoods, I guess chickens, are meant to be temporary, providing time for the reef to recover. How do you plan to keep the reef in a healthy state beyond the sort of life of this project? Essentially, what are you going to do next, I guess?
Well, I don't think the chickens are actually temporary. They become an alternative and a diversification for people of their incomes. And I think having the chickens in kind of keeps it balancing, because people have to fish kind of less. So I personally don't see it as a temporary intervention. And I think the communities itself also really like having two sources of income. So having that balance, and hopefully some other alternative livelihoods as well, hopefully reduce the pressure on the reef, being in there, and that will maintain the reef to keep going and restore and not get that unbalance, so to speak.
Great. Thank you. And I guess another question, you're on a roll, Marika. How do we, the one in the chat, how do we mitigate the cultural loss and damage when shifting traditional fishing communities towards alternative proteins like chicken? Did this shift pose a cultural challenge for communities beyond simply not fishing? There you go. That's a tough one.
Yeah, it is a really
Thanks,
tough
David.
one, and it's a really good question. Thank you, David. Back. We start with community consultation, and the community is always very central in what we do. Most of the countries and communities that we live in, there's quite a there's chiefs, there's tribes, there's all these kind of things that we kind of have to work with. We actually try to recover some of the traditional knowledge that might get lost because the changes in the world. So we've actually seen that we've brought back a lot of traditional knowledge through the project. We try to be really respectful for it, and we don't want to lose their fishing community, like their fishing tradition. We actually want to make sure that they can keep doing it for generations to come, by reducing the pressure on the fish at the moment. So that's definitely in our messaging, and we want to maintain that traditional knowledge. We want to learn, we want to do all these things. Like in our communities, no one knows the oceans like they do. So that's very much front and center when we do the work that we do. And also, like, we can't make people stop. People need to see that there's value in it, being in there. So that role of the community is definitely there. And the aim is really to let them get back to their traditional fishing in a way that doesn't damage nature, I guess.
Great, thank you, Marika. I know there's a question further up the chat from Mahe about whether there's any specific grievance mechanisms linked to livelihoods. I guess that's one for the project promoters, Rhett and Marika, if there is, and then perhaps Richard and Robert about how you might build that in theory.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question, Tom.
Yeah, the question, Mahe's curious to know if there's specific grievance mechanisms linked to livelihoods. I guess that relates to how people in the community can give their feedback and express their concerns about the livelihoods in particular.
I can answer that one. For forest
Thanks,
carbon project, we requires by standard, the Plan Vivo foundation standard. Every project have to develop their grievance mechanism pipelines in the community, and how we develop it is also central on the community themselves, how they want it to be like. But have the committee who assess that grievance among three of us, like for example for Nakau, livelihood and community. So and that grievance race is solve through, like, if we cannot solve at the project level, we go to the provincial level or go to the state level. We do have that in place for the Kaban project.
I think
Thanks, mate.
for us, because we work very closely with the community, I don't think we have a formal system set up to address that. But from experience in our projects, people feel very comfortable going to their chiefs, obviously, and the people that we work with to address some of those concerns that they may have. The community consultation is very inclusive. We have multiple sessions, so it's not like a one-off session. Come back to people, do the monitoring. We check in regularly with interviews and focus groups, and we don't find people to to be holding back. People care deeply about their communities. So I think that's our mechanism of getting those voices out there.
Thank you. Thanks, for being put on the spot, both of you there. Just one. So thanks everyone. I think that's most of the questions in the chat. Just one final sort of question for me to sort of imagine that we're how to move forward. And this will be a question I guess I asked to Robert or Richard to start with. So like, imagine I'm a project manager of a development project in a Pacific community. What process should I go through to help me understand where our activities falls on the nature positive livelihoods framework, and how to help us move forward up the scale? Where do I start?
I would say with the community and in the stakeholders, and let them tell you where they are and where they feel they are. It's been interesting doing the exercise in Fiji at the time with all the partners, because if you would have asked me, I probably would have had a different view than what Susan, who we brought along, mapped us at. So I would 100% say start with the stakeholders and let them tell their story of where they think they're at and why, to gain an understanding.
Thanks, Marika. Robert and Richard, would you like to add anything to that? Or
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, one of the key things that we've tried to emphasize is that the important starting place is people's livelihoods, of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and how that affects nature. And I think if we start looking at those strategies and the way that people are meeting their needs or not able to meet their needs, it can highlight those kind of interventions that we've heard described, that may be about short-term interventions that are meeting needs, or it may be about supporting people to be able to articulate and begin to address their longer-term aspirations. Richard?
And if I can maybe just add a little bit, I mean, I agree absolutely with what's been said. I think it's also really useful. I am very keen on having a good understanding of the historical context. So understanding the history of how livelihoods have changed, the kinds of pressures that people have faced and how they've dealt with them, and the way the environmental conditions have changed, but also to learn from different interventions over time, different projects that have already perhaps been implemented in the same area, addressing similar kinds of issues, whether these are from government or from NGOs or international development actors, and to try and get a better picture of where we are and where we might go forward.
great. Thank you, everyone. I guess we're almost at time, so better wrap things up. For some reason, I can't turn my camera on, so that's probably for everyone's benefit this time of day. But yeah, we better wrap it up now. So I think that was a really informative and engaging session, and it's a really interesting, exciting sort of piece of work that's very thought-provoking. I guess what's sort of resonates for me is that some initial assumptions that we had about the work were focused too much on livelihood activities, not on the strategies. So it's been really good to for that to be teased out, to help me and others to understand this better. So yeah, and the importance of considering sort of landscape level dynamics when you're planning and implementing your projects, a bit of systems thinking, really understanding the operating context where you are and how people there have different benefits and risks. And yeah, just being locally led as well as what sort of stands out. So thanks everyone for your participation today. Thanks Robert and Richard for working really hard on this piece of work and sharing some of the findings with us today. To Rhett and Veronica for their participation and answering the curly questions. To Veronica for making it all happen technology-wise. Thanks everyone for engaging in the discussion and for your feedback. And also, I guess, acknowledge DFAT, the funders, and all the CR by N partners. Many thanks for your participation today. So just to say, like the report that's behind this will be available on our website probably in the new year. So please check that out. We'll be sending out a recording of this session and a feedback survey very soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And continue to check Climate Resilient by Nature's LinkedIn and social media profiles, as Veronica's been working on some excellent communications for it. So, well, which are all about showing that when nature thrives, people do too. So thanks everyone again for your participation. For those of you that celebrate Christmas or have holidays, enjoy those. And yeah, we'll see you in the new year. Thanks everyone.